Good. For anyone tuning in, I'm here with Dr. Mejia. We've had some conversations over the past several months, weeks, and I've brought some attention to him with some of my players and things that they've been doing with their throwing routines, weighted balls, preparations throughout the winter on how they should approach things. Obviously, I have some experience dating back many years with players myself, as well with throwing. But there's a new thing that is coming with weighted balls. We're going to get into that kind of later here. But to start, I wanted to give Dr. Mejia, a friend of mine, I was trying to think of it today, ET. I think it's been 11 or 12 years since I've met you. It was way back at the beginning of the Panther days, which was in about the 2010 range, and now we're in 2022, which is it's kind of hard to believe that it's been that long already. But I wanted to hand the spotlight over to you. If you wanted to talk about your background in medicine, and then obviously with the Timber Rattlers, and then I think later into the late 2000s with the Brewers, and then just your basic background in your practice and in baseball in general.
Well, yeah, my name is Dr. Mejia, ET Mejia. I go by ET, and I've known Rick for a long time. I've had a lot of respect for Rick, and we've shared a lot of thoughts and discussions about baseball and how to keep baseball players healthy. I'm an orthopedic surgeon. I specialize in sports medicine. And my practice is Sports Medicine Center on the west side of Appleton. I see a lot of baseball players. Have been involved in baseball ever since I started my practice in Appleton 23 years ago, and I've been taking care of Timber Rattlers since I arrived in 1999, so for a little over 23 years. At that time, it was the Seattle Mariners. And as most people know, the Mariners contract was taken over by the Milwaukee Brewers, which was a blessing for all of us fans and for all Wisconsin baseball enthusiasts. And so that took place around 2008. And so I've participated in the medical side of baseball for a long time. I've also coached a number of teams where my kids played. The Brewers, ever since I've been involved with the Brewers, I've been in different capacities, obviously still with the Timber Rattlers, but since 2010, we really upped our game in the Dominican Republic, which is where the academies for Major League Baseball teams are located. And we've been through a number of transitions. We'll be opening a new academy actually in Santo Domingo at the capital. Hopefully within the next year. So a lot of growth, and I've been there from the grassroots. I've been to a number of spring trainings, but since my involvement in caring of the Dominican Baseball Academy, I'm in charge of all Latin American players that funnel into the Dominican Republic as our focal point from where they then get recruited into the United States. So I travel to Dominican Republic 2 to 3 times a year. And that's a major addition to my role as being in the Brewers medical staff.
Well, that's a nice little mini vacation for you too. But well, I think I remember you saying you only get to be there for 2 or 3 days, but
yeah,
be a nice place to go for a couple of days to do some pitcher evals. But that kind of takes me to my second question. And so you've been here for 23 years. What trends have you seen, in specifics, injuries and arm injuries with pitchers? Have you seen anything when you first started, maybe even to 10 years ago, and into what has happened within the last 10 years, and any different trends that have popped up and that you've seen a lot of lately?
Well, one of the trends that I've seen is the sports specialization in all kinds of sports. It used to be that in high school and even in the youth sports, A lot of players would play different sports based on the season, and specialization has been a big part of athletics in the youth category, from youth sports all the way into high school and beyond. Part of it is the competition has grown. Folks kind of self-select into a particular sports that they like. Parents also have some say in it, availability of the sport. So sports specialization has created kind of some unique perspectives that we can kind of go into in a little bit. And along those lines, year-round training in one particular sport kind of makes it so that it pigeonholes athletes into one sport. And when they fail to progress, then they select themselves out of any other sport. So that's kind of an interesting dynamic in youth sports, and all kinds, whether it's hockey or soccer or baseball, basketball, as you know. The other thing is training like a pro. There's been a lot of, YouTube is wonderful to gain a lot of information in many ways. And so parents learn a lot, coaches learn a lot, and the expectations of performance and that sort of thing get amplified. So thinking back when you started out, and certainly when I played sports, there were no video recordings. There was no YouTube kind of teaching you how to do anything. You basically just kind of competed, and you got better by watching and learning. So that's kind of an interesting thing. Parent expectations, they have an investment in time and money. And of course, there's expectations from them in terms of their kids' performance, but also coaching and expectations from team and playing time and that sort of thing. That creates a lot of animosity and anxiety. I think you've experienced some of that through your involvement in baseball. And then the other interesting thing is the introduction of the radar gun. That's another trend that parents will buy radar guns now. You just get them on eBay or Amazon. So those are some interesting things that I'm sure you can kind of relate.
Well, I can say the radar gun is the biggest and best motivator I've ever seen doing this. I remember getting our first one or using it for the first time back in the Panther days, and just seeing the kids get excited about it, which is great. There's a lot of good to that, but there's some bad to it as well. And kind of what you were just saying, I remember when I was in high school, basically when you started up here in 99 is when my high school career started. And we were done playing in sometimes late July, at best mid-August, if, your Legion team or your Babe Ruth team made it to a certain level of state or regionals. But once that hit, I didn't pick up a baseball. Well, later into my career, I would long toss, through September, maybe October, but I didn't pick up a baseball from middle of October, early October until basketball season was done, which is basically 2 weeks ago or a week ago. And then you'd go right into your baseball. We would do a couple throwing days a week in the gym before school. But that would be it. It was very, very light toss. But now, we've got kids throwing weighted balls in November, and they're not taking any time off. I'm a big believer in you got to take 7 to 8 weeks off every calendar year where you don't even pick up a baseball. That's kind of my train of thought with it. Others do things a little bit differently. But that's kind of what we've geared our kids to. We start our practices typically the week after Thanksgiving, and we don't pick up or use a radar gun until early February. So it's a very slow progression, get the arms going, and then it's a very gradual process until we really have the kids grip the ball and throw it as hard as they can. So that's kind of the way we look at it, the way we've approached it. Some people could say we're falling behind the times, so to speak. But one of my goals as a coach is to protect my players and do what I think is best. And in my experience is that has been the best thing for my players and keeping their careers, going as long as they can. And I've had some kids that have had some arm injuries that have derailed their careers and actually forced them to stop playing. And it's really sad that that happened. And it's one of those things. It is what it is. You can't prevent all of them, but with the way that things are trending, it seems it's getting worse and worse. And I'm sure you could touch on that a little bit more.
Let me ask you this.
Yeah.
Did you say that you played basketball?
I did. Yeah, I just did baseball, basketball, but a lot of guys in my age grade, when I went to school, there were still a lot of 3-sport guys.
Well,
I wasn't.
What's interesting about that is if you look at a 2 or 3 sport athlete, usually they're the most agile kids on the team. And you running a baseball academy, I mean, you got to deliver a product. So you get to see all comers, whether they're 3-sport and you're available for them. I don't think you're behind the times at all. I think you're right on the money, how you approach a disciplined approach to training baseball players and creating a love of the game. But your most agile players, because let's face it, baseball doesn't really create an agility type of situation. I mean, your most agile players are the ones that are kind of doing other sports and developing other parts of their body. So that's kind of the one thing that may be, happening in that trend that's happened in the past 20 plus years.
So it kind of leads us to the next question I wanted to get to. What do you recommend for various age groups and pitch counts? So, whether that would be in a game, a weekend, a spring, a summer, a full calendar year, how does that look to you based on age groups, and what would you recommend?
That's a excellent question. And the pitch count got introduced, 10, 15 years ago. And I think that's one of the greatest introductions into youth sports. But let's be clear. I mean, pitch counts are used in professional baseball as well, as you know. There's an old saying in baseball, you only have so many pitches in you. And so that comes from the old school where you have, many of the old big leaguers that eventually just kind of washed out because they had what was called a dead arm. So the pitch count, what it has done, it has increased awareness of overuse injuries in the upper extremities, both shoulder and elbow. And that's been a great thing. The USA Baseball is sort of the parent of youth baseball generally, and they have a program called Pitch Smart, which is very great. You can look that up, and it has a number of, it divides the pitch counts per age group, but the other side of the coin of how many pitches you can throw in a game is the number of days of rest. And that's the part that sometimes may be overlooked or forgotten. And so it's important to understand that the pitch count is a relative number. I always tell, and I've actually done a blog on our website where I say that early in the season, the pitch count should be on the lower side. Why? Because in Wisconsin, we got cooler weather. It takes a much longer time to warm up, and we're competing eventually with teams that are from Florida and Arizona, California, Texas, where they're playing year round in warm weather. So the pitch count, and even with the Timber Rattlers and the Brewers, early in the season, much lower pitch count. It'll be on the lower number. And then later on, as you get into what's called mid-season form, then you can start shooting for the upper limit. And then never forget the rest. The other thing about pitch count, it is not just per game. And so you kind of alluded to this. It's really per week, and then also the cumulative effect per season, and then per year. So you can learn about somebody that has been in a very competitive tournament type of arena where they get used a lot. Then you have to sort of make sure that that is taken into account. The one thing that's never taken into account is players that take pitching lessons and in the middle of the season, that kind of can also be taken into account. And then the last thing that comes to mind is many players play on multiple teams, and probably in high school baseball, once the high school season starts and you're only committed to the high school team, obviously, but then there's others that may play for you and also play for league team in the summer. And those coaches may not be communicating the pitch count that they had with the other coach, because they may not know each other, or they may not have that contact. So that's why players, and particularly parents, can be real advocates and learn about the pitch count. So the Pitch Smart program you can look up, and that goes over that very clearly. Very helpful.
It's interesting that you brought that up, because I was recently on a podcast called Travel Ball Podcast, and I listened to a lot of the previous episodes. And one thing in the travel ball world right now that coaches and academy people like myself are getting frustrated with is the tournament model. So, tournaments are going Wednesday or sometimes Thursday through Sunday, Wednesday through Sunday. So, it's like, how do you juggle it? Do you throw your number one on Wednesday, and how many pitches do you throw him, and how many days rest do you want to give him? And, you don't want to bring him back too soon. You don't want to risk the kid's future, and you want to win, you want to be competitive. And it's a really tough thing to balance. And I know in that podcast, a lot of guys and academy guys are trying to go away from the tournaments a little bit. The problem is the logistics of it. What teams are you going to play as far as like a weekly schedule, or, you play, Mondays, Wednesdays, Saturdays, or trying to figure out ways to play other travel teams where you can get college coaches there to recruit. But you don't have a 2 to 3, 4 day window where you're trying to get kids in multiple days and get them seen by multiple coaches. So that's something that I know is on the forefront of a lot of people's minds, like myself. It's great getting kids into big colleges and trying to get them drafted and get them in front of coaches, because that's one of the reasons we do this, is to get kids in front of schools and get them recruited. But you don't want it to come at the cost of them and their health and their arms. So that's certainly been a topic of conversation amongst people of where I'm at. So good to know those things. I know the Pitch Smart thing is something that a lot of the tournaments that we go to go by as far as their tournament rules and suggestions. So I have seen that, and it seems to be pretty good as far as what they're laying out. So
let me add something. In one of our conversations, you had mentioned, because when you were coming through baseball, there was not that formality of pitch counts, and you mentioned that there were times when you pitched a lot of balls in any particular game, and then turned around the next day or 2 days later and did the same thing. And it's important to highlight that the pitch count is a guideline, and some kids are going to be more developed than others, and your threshold for injury varies from different age levels and different individuals. You can have two perfectly symmetrical twins, and one may break down more than the other. So it's tough to know which player is going to be more durable than the other. And so that's why it's so important to have these guidelines.
Yeah, I've had some conversations with kids, and I'll have a 15-year-old and he'd be like, I'm at 30 pitches, my arm. So I'm like, what? I remember, I think I threw 166 pitches when I was 15 in the first game of the regional here in Appleton. And I came back on 2 days rest and threw another 120 or whatever it was. And I was fine. But maybe that was just me or adrenaline, maybe mixed with a little stupidity. So sometimes I get frustrated, but like you said, you got to step back. Everyone's different. Everyone's body's different. Everybody's arms are different, how they react, and how often they throw and what they do. So I need to take a step back sometimes and realize that myself. But as far as injuries, and I know we had touched on this, and I think you said you had done a couple Tommy Johns in the last several months. So what are some of, or maybe the main injury, that's going on right now, elbow, shoulder. I've had a number of teammates that have had Tommy John. A couple of my coaches on my staff had Tommy John. And you can still see the scars on the elbow. I was fortunate enough not to have any surgeries. I never got hurt, so I've been lucky on that front. I've also had some teammates have the labrum surgery done, and I know there's probably 4 of them. 3 out of the 4 came back not as strong. A couple of them lost scholarships. I remember one guy was throwing 93, 94. He came back after labrum and, was throwing in the mid 80s and lost a scholarship. So, what are you seeing as far as injuries, UCLs, labrums? Where have we trended recently with that?
Yeah, that's a great question, because the trend since I started treating baseball players, over 20 years ago, has moved from shoulder injuries to elbow injuries. Along those lines, there's been a trend towards increase in velocity too. So there's a velocity component that subjects the elbow to a lot more stress and torque. And so with the increase in velocity in pitchers, even at the Major League Baseball level, you see how many players eventually break down, because that amount of torque in the elbow is really not sustainable. And so you always cringe when some of the harder thrower pitchers that you see, up in the high 90s and, touching 100, when they're going to break down, you always kind of worry about it. And we have some of those in our Brewer organization, and we take really good care of those players. So shoulder and elbow injuries are the 2 areas that we really see when I see a player on my schedule, and I see multiple players every day, including today. More and more has become elbow. Now, when we talk about elbow, it depends on age, whether it's a growth plate problem or a ligament problem. And the ligament that we always refer to as the Tommy John ligament, or the ulnar collateral ligament. Less and less we're seeing shoulder injuries. I think we've become more aware at spotting them and treating them. And most of the time we can treat them without surgery. We found out over the years that the whole labral tear, or what's called the slap tear, did not do as well as we thought they would do with surgery. And the results, and so many players that did not make it into their previous level of pitching. And so the results were not like we'd want them to be. So we found different ways to treat the slap tear, but we're just not seeing it as often. Slap tears were also overdiagnosed. And that's the other area that, anytime somebody has shoulder pain and you got an MRI, so many were overcalled, whether it's by radiologists or a physician, and many underwent surgery, and then the standard surgery, and then the fact that they weren't coming back at the same level. And I've seen many players from different organizations that just never made it. The Tommy John surgery has become more common. And in fact, in terms of trends, I've also seen the trends of female softball players, because softball has grown. And, in the past several months, I've done several female softball players. So if you can imagine that, normally that's not what you expect.
Yeah, even with the underhand motion.
Well, many of them that are playing, that are position players.
Okay, throwing over.
And catchers.
Okay.
Yeah,
okay.
I've done 2 catchers recently, actually, and a number already this year. But I do Tommy John surgery year round, because some of them that linger and continue throughout the rest of the year eventually come to the realization, like, hey, nothing's working, and then they come to you, and then you kind of diagnose with that ligament tear.
So ET, what is a normal recovery time for a Tommy John right now, and what are the percentages of a young kid coming back from that as strong or stronger?
Great question. The Tommy John surgery, just to clarify for those that are watching, is where you take the ligament in the inside of the elbow and you replace it with a spare tendon that we have sometimes in the forearm or in the knee.
Or ankle sometimes too, right?
Or, well, yeah, right. But the common ones
ankle.
are knee and forearm. They're more durable and they're accessible. And so that's what we do. We basically just kind of drill holes into the bone and we pass a tendon. And now that tendon needs to incorporate into the capsule of the elbow and become scarred in there so that it provides that stability that once it tears, then it becomes kind of a little bit lax and is painful. That process takes many months. And so the standard quote is 9 to 15 months. Because people track professional baseball players, you can see one that once they blow their ligament, they may miss an entire season and then part of the next, because it takes a long time for them to get to that same degree of play. Now, many times, some people kind of quote that the elbow becomes stronger and that you're better. What they don't realize is you're better than where you were as your ligaments started to fail and you started to kind of underperform. So, but it doesn't necessarily make you better and stronger. That's kind of one of the myths that we can address. The return to play and return to same level of play are two different things. So you can come back to competitive baseball, but if you really look at the results of many studies, a number of the statistics may suffer. Some of them come back at the same level, and those are fantastic. But if you look at the bigger numbers, whether it's ERA, whether it's wins and loss, velocity, whether it's WHIP, and a number of other statistics that are followed, most numbers are actually not going to be the same. And so about 85% return to play is kind of the number that you will see. But those numbers are actually not as great in younger players. So that means in high school and even in pre-high school levels, which I see a number of injuries. So we have to kind of be mindful of that just saying, okay, let's just do Tommy John surgery so that you can come back and be stronger. Found back when the whole pitch count philosophy came up, there was a understanding that breaking balls were the main reason for ligament tears, whether it's shoulder injuries or elbow ligament tears. The reality is that the highest torque in the elbow is the fastball. That puts the highest amount of stress in that ligament. And most of the time when you have an injury is throwing a fastball. And so those are biomechanical studies that have really kind of clarified that question. Now, the problem is when somebody is a curveball thrower that throws a lot of curveballs, but doesn't have good mechanics, then you're really putting significant strain on the elbow just because you don't have that smooth curveball trajectory. And so bad mechanics is equivalent to risk factors for tearing the ligament.